The Philippines just emerged from midterm elections, and while it's good news for President Rodrigo Duterte, it's bad news for democracy and human rights. Half of the 24 Senate seats were up for grabs, and every single one of them went to pro-Duterte candidates. This is especially troubling because up until now, the Senate had been the last effective check against Duterte, who is immensely popular in the Philippines, but is widely viewed as an autocrat with an abysmal record on human rights. He clenched power in 2016 by touting a tough on drugs and crime platform, and since then there have been an estimated 5,000 extrajudicial killings, mostly by police. Another concerning facet of the recent elections, widespread vote buying. After he cast his own ballot on May 13th, Duterte told a journalist the practice is integral to elections in the Philippines. Quote, "There are no candidates who do not buy votes." So that's reassuring. The whole murder is bad thing aside, Americans have cause to be very dismayed by what is going on in the Philippines. And here to tell us why is Jackie Mariano, attorney for International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. Thanks for joining us. Matt Rosales from Migrante Youth New York. Thanks for coming on the show. And Bernadette Patino from the Malaya movement. Welcome to 112 BK.
Thanks. Yeah.
So maybe we can start by just touching on why Duterte is such bad news for the Philippines. Do you want to take that, Jackie?
Sure. So Duterte is a strangely popular president. His approval ratings have always been kind of at an all-time high.
I think it's 79% recently.
Yes. So a huge chunk of the Philippine population supports him, despite what we're seeing in the media about the atrocities of his administration. What we hear about the most is his drug war, which critics of the drug war often call a war on the poor. To this date, and he's only been president for about 3 years, the number has risen as high as 30,000 dead in his war. And that number kind of changes depending on who is reporting it, and it's not quite an exact number, but it rises as high as 30,000.
And Matt, let's talk about these 30,000 deaths. So are these drug dealers, are these drug addicts, and how are they dying?
So a majority of the people who are getting killed from the drug war are people usually in the urban poor areas. And a lot of them are small-time drug dealers or people who just got mixed up. There have been many cases of extrajudicial killings committed by the PNP or the Philippine National Police, where the circumstances of people's deaths were very troubling. They were very vague in their fact patterns. One thing we do know for sure is that a lot of the big-time drug dealers in the Philippines are still not locked up. They're still out on the streets distributing drugs, and a lot of people just get caught in the crossfire of all of this.
So after 3 years, Duterte has been able to say, oh, look, we're cracking down on drugs and crime, but actually there have been no high-level arrests. It's just low-level offenders who are being executed. Yeah. And for people who don't know what extrajudicial killings is, the word just means it takes place outside of the legal system. So it's sort of like vigilante justice, and anyone can be found with drugs with quotes around it and killed by the police, right?
Right.
So Bernadette, we've talked about how popular Duterte is despite all this. Why are 79% of Filipino voters saying, actually, this is great?
I would say we should be critical about these surveys. Those who conduct it tend to reward the people who fill out the survey. So we have to be critical of who is conducting the survey. And I think it's also part of the narrative of the Philippine government saying that the people think that this is right. I was living in the Philippines at the time when the drug war started. It escalated very quickly. Even Duterte was inaugurated, and the literally overnight 40 people were killed in the name of the so-called drug war. And we also have to be critical of why is the Duterte administration wanting to pursue this? What is the logic behind it? And I think what we see now is this violence that's happening on the streets just gets caught in this confluence of violence that the Philippine government wants to put out against human rights defenders. They're wearing masks, no one knows who they are. And then this was sort of how vigilante killings began in the so-called drug war. And then this same tactics of killings have been repeated with killing priests or killing lawyers who are defending for example, farmers who are fighting for land rights. So you can see how the anti-drug campaign kind of became this sort of smoke and mirrors where it's a way for the government to kind of use it as an excuse to say like, oh, we don't know who's conducting these killings. We can't claim it as the government. We just know like deaths are happening. No one knows the number. So it's this deliberate sort of disinformation, confusion among the public. So then it's hard to have, I think, a critical public discourse about it because people are getting like just wrong information everywhere. And I think this is exacerbated by the propaganda that we see on Facebook.
I mean, so it sounds like once you normalize extrajudicial killings by death squads against drug dealers, it becomes just okay to put out hits on anyone who opposes the government. And we've seen also a crackdown on journalists. The founder of the Rappler recently jailed it this past year, I believe.
8 times and posted bail. If not 9, 8 or 9 times.
Wow, and it's all on trumped up charges about what tax evasion and things like that, right? But actually, it's because she's been critical of the Duterte administration.
And cyber libel, that's another charge that she was facing.
Cyber libel. All right, okay. So Trump has actually been a big fan of Duterte and his administration. Here's a quote from a transcript of a phone call from 2017. He said, "I just want to congratulate you because I'm hearing of the unbelievable job on the drug problem. Many countries have the problem. We have the problem. But what a great job you're doing. And I just wanted to call and tell you that." Talk to me a little bit about this relationship between Trump and Duterte. I know that Duterte has been called the Trump of the Philippines, but maybe Trump is the Duterte of America?
For those who don't know, the Philippines is a former colony, arguably still very much a colony of the United States. Since 1898, the U.S. Bought the Philippines from Spain, along with Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Guam, in a nice $20 million deal in the Treaty of Paris in 1898. And since then, the United States has always ensured their control of the Philippine Islands by hand-picking puppet leaders. And so Duterte is someone who did not get this prior approval from the United States to rise into power. And so people voted for Duterte because he did not speak the same language that traditional politicians in the Philippines have.
Bernadette, maybe you can tell me a little bit about currently the type of aid that the U.S. government provides to the Philippines.
Right. Currently, so the United States provides $184.5 million in U.S. aid to the Philippines. And I think Jackie probably could answer this question a little bit more. But yeah, so a large part of this aid goes to funding the Philippine National Police, who are those who are carrying out the anti-drug campaign of the Duterte regime. And also goes to the armed forces of the Philippines. So there's a lot of joint trainings that happen between U.S. soldiers and Philippine soldiers, sharing of arms. And this aid is kind of put together in one giant bag, and it doesn't get differentiated of like, oh, which goes where, what goes here. There's no official way to stop that aid because it contributes to human rights violations in the Philippines. So that's why our various organizations have been campaigning, especially ICHRP has been leading this campaign to end U.S. military aid to the Philippines and changing the language around that aid.
I mean, that seems to be confusing, I think, right? To like progressives who are like, wait, why is everybody always saying that we shouldn't be giving foreign aid to countries? It's a minute portion of our budget. Of course, we need to be, amping up our humanitarian efforts to countries. But you're actually advocating for cutting back on foreign aid to the Philippines. Is that right?
That's right. And actually, the percentage of the U.S. budget that goes towards military funding is actually quite large. According to one of ICHRP's member organizations, the War Resisters League, about 48% of the entire U.S. budget is funding military spending. And
that includes not just U.S. defense spending, that includes defense spending for other countries.
Correct, exactly. And some of the top 3 countries that the U.S. is funding militarily right now includes the Philippines, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. And so the Philippine military budget, 35% of it actually is U.S. money. And, a third of it wouldn't function without the U.S. arms sales.
And Matt, why is that? Why is the U.S. so invested in strengthening the Philippine military?
Yes, and I think it's because the Philippines historically has been a very key geopolitical country in Southeast Asia. I mean, just going back to the Vietnam War, it was a platform for bombing operations in Vietnam during that time. And I guess in the early 2000s, when the war on terror really came into full swing, one of the reasons why the U.S. wanted to keep the Philippines very close was because of their view that terrorist organizations would eventually move to the southern part of the Philippines in Mindanao and really be an incubator for groups such as Al Qaeda and more recently ISIS. And though there is some truth to this, that there are terrorist organizations that are affiliated with ISIS that exist in the Philippines, it does not and should not justify the U.S. funding of institutions like the AFP, the PNP, institutions like funding institutions that commit atrocities of human rights.
Let's come back to the elections. So this was a huge win for Duterte and his supporters. Also, Imee Marcos, the daughter of Ferdinand and Imelda, won a seat, won a Senate seat.
Right.
How much of this can we attribute to voter fraud, to bribery, to vote buying, and how much of it is the fact that Duterte is seemingly popular? Matt?
There is no good estimate of how large this or how impactful this voter fraud was. We just know that it happened. Imee Marcos, to my knowledge, is not really a very big figure in national politics. So it was really shocking for me to find out that she won a seat. As with many people in the Philippines.
I mean, as an outsider, it was shocking for me too. That to me, I think of the Marcoses as being these corrupt politicians, and the Philippines suffered at their hands, and so to elect their daughter was surprising to me. And it seems to be pointing to this pattern of these autocratic strongmen being elected again and again. And I'm curious about if any of you have any insight into sort of the larger pattern of Filipino leadership in the 20th century and now to the 21st.
Yeah, Philippine politicians gain a lot of popularity through their names. And the Philippines is very much an oligarchy where only a few landowning families that make up the 1%, literally the 1% of the Philippines, also runs the government. Imee Marcos's election into the Senate was kind of not a surprise because, one, we're dealing with some deep-seated regionalism in the Philippines, because before the Philippines was the Philippines, it was just an amalgamation of different tribes and nations. And so those who were from the Ilocos region, the north, people tend to vote for folks that are from their region. There's also a severe erasure of the actual atrocities committed under martial law by the Marcos family that, people growing up today who are voting maybe for the first time never learned about it in school, are taught that martial law was good for the country. And so if Imee Marcos comes from that legacy, she must be good.
And it should also be noted that Duterte's family were Marcos supporters during the martial law era.
And as we mentioned in the intro, this is terribly bad news now that not only do you have Duterte as the head of the government, but the courts are in his pocket, and it looks like now the Senate is not going to be able to stand in his way. And some of the things that he has said that he's interested in passing forward are reinstating the death penalty for drug crimes. And this was crazy to me, reducing the age of criminal liability from 15 to 9.
Right.
Yes.
So we have that to look forward to with this new Senate, it looks like, unfortunately. What can Americans, what can Brooklynites do if they're concerned about their taxpayer money going to funding extrajudicial killings by Duterte's government?
Well, they can plug into ICHRP's campaign to cut U.S. aid to the Philippine military and police. I think it's really important to urge Brooklynites to get, to be part of this campaign. If not join ICHRP, at least, in one's individual capacity, shoot an email or give a call to your federal representatives and the senators here in New York.
And we should remind people that ICHRP is the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines.
Right, correct.
If folks in Brooklyn want to, stand against the fascist Duterte administration, so we have this big parade. We're inviting everyone to join our contingent. All you have to do is wear black and wear one of our ribbons, and you can come and march with us on the streets to advocate for freedom and democracy in the Philippines.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.